Broads Media.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome on into this episode of Schmoozed. Today we are joined by Jon Anik, the voice play-by-play of UFC. What's up, Jon? Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to join me.
My man, Hunter, good to be with you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Look, I actually just had my puppy get fixed yesterday, so I'm going through the debacle of the fiance upstairs. I can hear her screaming, but we're going to sit here and talk UFC instead, which I'd rather be doing.
Well, hey, I'll tell you, I don't know if you guys want to have kids, and it's none of my business, but I can only think of one way to, I won't say optimally prepare for having children, but the only way to even resemble having children is to care for a puppy or a dog or an animal and have a dependent, something or someone that depends on you to survive every day. So good on you for that. But 3 kids is enough for me. No dogs around here.
Yeah, we'll eventually get to that point. We have a 6-year-old dog, and then we got the 6-month puppy. So the experiment right now, or the experience, I should say, is definitely interesting. But I do have to be honest with you before we jump into some fighting talk here. So I needed quarantine to happen for me to find my appreciation for the fight game. I do sports talk radio here in Philadelphia, so my attention has been the 4 major teams. But when there was nothing going on, I'm like, okay, let's see what this is all about. And I have an addictive personality. When I'm in, I'm in. I have UFC Fight Pass. I go back and watch all the history of the game. So I'm in the process now of learning all of the history. But since quarantine happened and UFC was the only fighting or the only sport on at the time, I am obsessed and I can't get enough of it.
It's great for me to hear. And candidly, Hunter, I have felt that when we have been back on the road in front of fans in Glendale, Arizona, or Houston, Texas. Like, it feels like our domestic fan base grew like 15 or 20% during that first year of COVID-19, really like from March of 2020 to April or May of 2021. So obviously it means a lot to me to hear from sort of a mainstream American sports fan like yourself, for lack of a better way to put it. And candidly for me, you know, there was a time in my career where I was so defensive of boxing that I sort of was giving mixed martial arts the Heisman. So, you know, I do think for a lot of people, when you really allow yourself to sort of immerse yourself in the sport, understand some of the superficial violence that kind of permeates the game a little bit. If you can get past the blood, as I tell my mother, she can't get past it. It's the greatest sport in the world. Hopefully one day she'll get past the blood.
I'm with you. See, originally for me, I would say it was too gory, too much. But then I think of, especially for me, I'm huge on the mental side of sports. And when I look at these people and I think about what they're going through on the mental side, forget the physical, forget the punches, Derek Lewis, and the way that they're able to just clock guys in the face and whatnot, and women. It comes down to when you're in a choke and when you're on the bottom of the mat, and then the adrenaline rush of people. I could never do it. And the fact that they can almost puts me where I need to be as a viewer of, I can't wrap my head around it. And that's why I'm so damn intrigued.
Yeah, I mean, I think you put it well. I think it's one thing to think about yourself as a layman. And if you're out running and you run 4 miles, it's like, am I mentally tough enough to do 6? Like my body's probably not going to physically break down. They might be 12-minute miles, but like you can do those final 2 miles. But when you're in a competitive setting as a professional athlete with all the bells and whistles and the lights, and you're not defending a rim or a goal, you're defending your face, it's crazy. It's something that I can't relate to. And candidly, one of the harder parts of my job for me is that I'm not a lifelong martial artist. And so even though I've trained in jiu-jitsu and boxing, hate jiu-jitsu, by the way, but even though I've trained in those disciplines, you know, there's no simulating that for me, short of maybe taking an amateur MMA fight. So I share your appreciation for all of these athletes and their mental and physical toughness.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, so let's jump into some 2021 storylines and take a look at what's going down here. And I guess I'll start right out of the gates with the fight of the year. Now, you know, I know Gaethje and Chandler, that's one that sticks out. I want to get your thoughts on what you would say the fight of the year is, or was, I should say.
Well, you know, sometimes it's hard to not focus on some of the fights we've seen in the fourth quarter or later in the year, right? I mean, what Max Holloway did against Calvin Kattar in January of 2021 is the most insane thing I've ever seen in mixed martial arts, just the greatness of that singular performance. But award shows that are done in late December, early January, a year later, ain't got time for Max Holloway on ABC in January of 2021. So for me, yes, it was Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler. I think Alexander Volkanovski and Brian Ortega, the back and forth nature of the middle of their fight, I can understand why people would give that consideration. Certainly Max Holloway against Yair Rodriguez for sure. I think it depends what your criteria is. A lot of people want to see a true back and forth fight for their fight of the year. They want to see a close fight. And you can argue that Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler, even though it had that back and forth ebb and flow, wasn't particularly close, nor was Volkanovski against Ortega. But for me, I like blood. Chandler Gaethje, Madison Square Garden backdrop, I should say. That was the best fight of the year for me in 2021.
Yeah, I guess for me, when I watched Chandler, obviously they went in there with the idea of let's have some fun, let's put on a show, and let's make this super exciting. And I just feel that he let that, and I want to get your thoughts on this, he almost let that mentality dictate some of his, some of his movements, where if he just took a deep breath and still went in there with that thought, but dialed it back just a bit, maybe it could have went a bit longer. Maybe he wasn't standing in the pocket so freely as much. And look, I mean, it was super fun, and I had a hell of a time watching it, but just a little step back. I thought that mental approach might have been the downfall, but as we're talking about it as the fight of the year. So did they get what they wanted out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you set it up and put it beautifully. I think Michael Chandler went in there as a clear intention man that night, and he wasn't necessarily chasing a title shot and going to lean on his fight IQ. His longtime striking coach, Henry Hooft, immediately to my right, livid, right, with the approach that this guy is just going, balls to the wall and not thinking about defense or anything like that. That fight is going to end up in the UFC Hall of Fame. And that's a big deal, so I can understand why Michael Chandler kind of took that approach. But if you're fighting somebody like Justin Gaethje, I do think you have to be more measured. You have to run a little bit of clock. You got to try to wrestle and grapple a little bit. And Chandler wasn't playing that game that night. Obviously, we're all the beneficiaries as fight fans. But for Michael Chandler, it's a setback as far as his championship trajectory. There's no doubt about it.
All right, so what's next for Gaethje when he gets into the octagon with Oliveira? How do you see that shaping up? Because, look, I love the Oliveira story, and he just continues to shine. I have fell into the Dustin Poirier fan club, so that was a little devastating for me to see, and I don't know what's next for him. We'll talk more on that. But a Gaethje Oliveira, one, what can you say about Oliveira's journey? Because that's ridiculous. And then, two, with that potential matchup.
It's a fascinating stylistic matchup. I feel like Charles deserves the distinction as the betting favorite, and I think he'll open probably close to 2-1. The betting line's probably already out there. I think Charles Oliveira has more ways to win, but Justin Gaethje, not unlike Oliveira, is only getting better, right? I mean, these guys are not resting on their laurels, and I think no matter what your chosen craft or walk of life, in a lot of respects, you're either getting better or getting worse. I don't know if you can relate to that as a media personality and a talking head, but you're probably not idling. You're probably getting better or getting worse. And Justin Gaethje is a much more layered striker even now than he was when he made his UFC debut. So, yeah, I mean, I certainly like Gaethje early on in that fight, but I think Charles has a lot of ways to win, and I think if he can get Gaethje down a couple of times, his confidence is going to go through the roof, and not anybody you want to play with either around your back or on the canvas. So it's a fascinating matchup. I think the big question right now is whether or not Oliveira is going to have enough of an appetite for that fight to make it happen, because he keeps shouting the name Conor McGregor, and Conor wields a lot of power in this game, as you well know.
Yeah, and look, with me there, obviously, you're right. The name, it pops. It's unbelievable. But in terms of the most deserving, I mean, I don't know how you could argue anyone but Gaethje right now, right?
Well, you could argue Islam Makhachev because he's undefeated.
Sure.
Well, I shouldn't say undefeated in the UFC, but he's on this great run since the loss to Adriano Martins. He's won 9 or 10 in a row. But you're right. He's got a fight on the books against Beneil Dariush. That's a main event and a true lightweight title eliminator. And, Dana White, by and large, leans into the meritocracy. Like, he wants things to sort of play out competitively the way they should. And I do believe that he'll find a way to get Justin Gaethje and Charles Oliveira in that octagon. But Charles is going to take on all comers, and he welcomed that title defense against Dustin Poirier. He got the signature win, and now Charles has a little bit of leverage, right? I don't have to tell you the difference in his paycheck fighting Justin Gaethje and fighting Conor McGregor. So if I'm Charles, yes, I prioritize defending the belt in Brazil, ideally in May. But if Conor McGregor is not ready, I'm trying to defend against Justin Gaethje, and I have all the confidence in the world that I'm going to win that fight at home.
What's it like calling a fight with Conor McGregor being in that octagon? He's either a hate the face or you absolutely love him. For me personally, I don't mind watching him lose, especially as I alluded to, I'm a Dustin Poirier fan, so watching that whole thing play out was exciting towards the last couple how do you do's. But what's it like? Because I don't know, I can't imagine the adrenaline rush when it's his name and that intro music and everything surrounded Conor McGregor.
It's a great question, and candidly, it's one that I don't get asked all that often because there have been a lot of big fight feel environments, right? When Chris Cyborg fought Amanda Nunes, right? I mean, obviously UFC 268 with Usman and Covington running it back a second time. I mean, I'm anxious in all the best ways going to that octagon on fight night, but there's nothing like calling a Conor McGregor pay-per-view. You know, like when I'm packing my suitcase, it feels different. The whole week feels different when I am crafting my pay-per-view open that I memorize and deliver to a camera to millions of people. It's not lost on me that more people are going to ingest that open, 4 times as many people potentially than your average UFC pay-per-view. So yeah, man. I mean, those are the biggest sporting events in the world. I think for me, short of doing an NFL game or doing a Super Bowl, with respect to all of our great champions, those Conor McGregor fights are the biggest nights of my professional career.
Yeah, and I guess I could tie that to when I work, and there's nothing wrong with airtime's airtime for me. I'm in my head down stage, and I'm putting my head down and saying yes to every possibility. But throughout the holidays, I had an opportunity to fill in morning show, afternoon drive, and then there's weekend slots, and I'm on the weekends. And then when I get a chance, it's my opening monologue's probably a little bit sharper, and my night of sleep before. It's like, hey, I got my notepad a little bit cleaner with less scribble. So I understand what it's like for sure. And it's just crazy because the atmosphere of a packed building, and I'm sure you did get this question a lot throughout, but it is interesting to think about watching fights at the Apex compared to doing it at a Madison Square Garden. And even from the fighter's perspective, I have to imagine hearing people right there calling the fights and things of that nature. So, how weird and bizarre in the emptiness is it, or is it just business as usual?
Well, as far as my job is concerned, it is business as usual, but I'll sort of admit to you here, I mean, it's frustrating, right? Like, it's a totally different sport in a lot of respects when you change the octagon size and you get rid of fans. And sometimes people think I make too much of the octagon size, but when we're in a big arena, T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, it's a 30-foot octagon. You get all the pageantry that comes with it. You got fans. So even if you have a bad warm-up in the back, the crowd oftentimes can elevate you. Juxtaposed against the UFC Apex with a 25-foot octagon, it's 31% smaller. So if you're a striker that leans on his athletic gifts with your footwork on the outside, I mean, wrestlers and grapplers are right up on you in 2 seconds in the smaller octagon, So the fact that like Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic completed their trilogy at the UFC Apex, to me, will always be off-putting. Certainly there are some luxuries, conveniences as a broadcaster doing shows at our UFC staff building, essentially. But I love doing fights with fans, man. And, as much of a company guy as I am, I rue the day that I got to call fights at the Apex. It just feels totally different.
For sure. And then you always hear interesting storylines. For example, Derek Lewis, he fights in the hometown, Houston, the place is going wild. And then compare that to maybe some of his other outings and results. And do you think that goes along? It's interesting that it plays out that way for him specifically. Where do you see that in terms of the storyline behind Derek Lewis?
So when we had our fighter meeting with Derek in Houston, Texas, and we can glean a lot from these fighter meetings, sitting down with these guys 3 or 4 days out, especially when you have a guy like Daniel Cormier in there that I think creates an openness from some of these guys. Derek Lewis was very candid about his nerves going into that fight. I think Derek thrives in front of a crowd, not his hometown crowd. Like the dream is to headline at Toyota Center until it becomes the nightmare because everybody wants tickets and everybody wants a piece of you. And there's not just national and international media requests, but all the local stuff. So yeah, I mean, I do think that the Cyril Gane matchup for Derek is always going to be a difficult one. And I do think Cyril probably beats him 8 out of 10 times, but I do think the hometown showcase definitely got in Derek's head. And yeah, he's been a guy who's thrived at the UFC Apex. Other guys have not. Even Dominic Cruz has said competing in Jacksonville with no fans was just totally eerie. And he did have a bad warm-up, and then there was no crowd to sort of snap him out of it. So I know a lot of people disagree with me. They think that the small octagon just has these guys killing each other and leads to more finishes. For me, give me the 30-footer and a crowd every day of the week.
Yeah, I'm with you there for sure. All right, I got a couple more for you. You touched on Usman earlier, and every time I watch him fight, there's something new. As I watch Joel Embiid right now for the Sixers, he's playing at an MVP level, and every game it's, wow, the passing's better. Wow, the defense gets better. Wow, this, that. Every single time, it's something new, and I relate it to him. Every time he's in that octagon, I swear there's something else that pops that he added to his game and made it even more dominant than it already was, and I don't know how he's going to lose.
Right. It really is incredible. It really is, because even dating to his UFC debut, 2015, right? Not that long ago, you knew then when he submitted Haider Hassan to win the Ultimate Fighter that we were dealing with something special. It was methodical early, right? He's added a lot of tools. Obviously, he has welcomed in new coaching. A lot of people point to his jab as far as the physical traits, but right before he was going to knock out Jorge Masvidal, I started to say, you know, of all the superlatives that you would use to describe Kamaru Usman, and then boom, Masvidal was out cold, and I had to bail on that, obviously, to call the end of the fight. But of all the superlatives that people use to talk about Kamaru Usman, one thing that I think stands above the rest, this is where I was going to go, is the mental, man. I mean, you touched on it off the top. You know, he is as mentally conditioned an athlete as we have. You know, no negative emotions when it comes to training or preparation ever. You know, he's had to deal with emotional challenges like his dear friend Gilbert Burns. He's had to deal with rivalries, of course, with Tyron Woodley and with Colby Covington most recently. He's passed every test with flying colors, and you know, his body of work is already more impressive than guys who are considered all-time greats like Khabib Nurmagomedov. So if you wanted to sit here, Hunter, and say to me, I think Kamaru Usman is the UFC GOAT right now, like I wouldn't argue with you.
Well, the thing is, and I'll openly admit it, I still got to go back and do more research before I can make some sort of thing like. But that's like, I won't half-ass it. It's crazy. Every morning, I'm an addict to coffee, which is interesting enough. That's why I tweeted that out when I was having my cup of Joe to get your attention. And I throw on, you go to UFC fight night, and it's like, all right, we'll work backwards. UFC 197, UFC 196. And I know that there's other things in between. I do stick with the pay-per-views just to get myself going here. But I do want to flip to the women's side real quickly, because the latest we saw was massive, massive, massive for Nunes to lose and for Pena to get that victory. What was going through your brain when you saw that happen? Because I know my jaw hit the floor and it didn't pick back up until maybe 4 a.m. here on the East Coast. I couldn't fall asleep. I'm staring at the ceiling going, did that really happen?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking in my mind, this is getting away from Amanda Nunes awfully quickly after a pretty good first round. You know, Conan Silveira, Amanda Nunes' longtime head coach, is a good friend of mine. And I have a lot of good friends actually on both sides of this particular championship matchup. But Amanda Nunes has always been the most coachable athlete in the gym, right? Even though she isn't in the gym like Usman, maybe 355 days a year. She's a master executor. And that's why against a fighter like Felicia Spencer, you saw she beat the brakes off her like 50-40. Everyone's bemoaning the fact that she didn't get a finish. She was waiting for Felicia to make a mistake, and the mistake did not materialize. So she stuck to the game plan. The result was 5 dominant rounds. And for whatever reason on this night, she just didn't have it. You know, I mean, we should highlight Juliana Pena, but it's hard not to talk about all these narratives when it comes to Amanda Nunes. And candidly, Hunter, until we have a rematch, it's hard for me to give you too much on what happened this night, right? Because that's going to give me the clarity that I need. I think right now it's the biggest upset in UFC history, because Amanda Nunes at her best is the GOAT, and Juliana Pena pieced her up and then choked her out and made her quit, you know? So I need to see a second fight in the worst way. It's not easy for Amanda to make 135 pounds. But Juliana Pena is a dog, and I have long called her the meanest woman in MMA, and that says nothing of all the skills that she finally has the confidence in to really use. Couldn't be happier for her. But I do believe Amanda Nunes is going to be heard from again. I just can't think she's going to let that loss sit too long before getting back in.
And we'll never know the actual answer, obviously, but I think you're right where you say the next fight will tell us more. It did seem maybe she was so overwhelmed and taken back and on the back of her heels. Was the tap a little, I don't want to say premature, and we're not in that position, so it's hard for us to sit here and go, oh, you tapped too early. But that was a conversation piece of, you know, was it fully engaged? Was it fully locked? And was she more of just whoa, am I really here? And that sort of kicked in more so than it really being where it needed to be for her to tap, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that it was quick, and it sort of had some give up in it. If people wanted to question her heart in that instinct, I would not be at the front of the line. I just think she didn't have it. And this is why I would always acknowledge guys like Kamaru Usman, but Floyd Mayweather, right? For all the slow starts that Floyd Mayweather had in his career against Sugar Shane Mosley and other guys, he was never flat on fight night. Started slowly against Conor McGregor, came back, finished him, right? It's very hard to never be flat on fight night. And in the NBA, obviously, if Joel Embiid has a bad game, it's okay, right? In the Olympics and in fight sports, that's not okay, right? And the Olympics, it's even harder because you're preparing for 4 years for a moment. But to never be flat on fight night is asking a lot. And for all these championship training camps for Amanda Nunes and your guy, Dustin Poirier, thought it was asking a whole lot for him to complete that capstone, complete that year, beat Conor twice, and then beat Charles Oliveira. Sometimes it's just asking too much to be perfect, 3 or 4 times a year. And I don't know. I look for a very motivated Amanda Nunes in the rematch, and it's going to take a big effort,
Yeah, for sure. All right, my last one for you. Thug Rose. Amazing. I'm in love with this story. And I will say, though, the last fight, the second one, the rematch, I thought it could have went either way. Is that crazy to say?
No, I mean, I thought Joanna Jędrzejczyk beat Zhang Weili, and she hasn't fought since, So, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these fights are close, and the rounds themselves are very difficult to score. I thought Rose won, but that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, I love her story, and the moment she got that belt wrapped around her waist, that's got to be the beauty of it from your perspective. Just the reactions, I'm sure, and I guess that ties sort of into this one real quick is, come on, those facial expressions and the way that you guys get caught on that camera afterwards, is it just pure reaction at this point? I mean, you'd have to imagine at some point it's there, or is it just, look, this is it, I'm calling it, and that's real?
Well, I would think you being in the business and being a UFC fan would know that we're not putting on, man. It's a tiny little fucking camera. It's in front of Joe Rogan, so I don't even see it. But no, I mean, the thing is like, what was your reaction at home when Pena beat Nunes?
The same thing.
Right? So like, I'm sitting here thinking like, shit, man, I got to provide the historical context for this moment. But when it's playing out, you're saying, what are you thinking? I'm like, man, it's like happening too fast for me to actually call the action, So I can assure you there's no fabrication on my end. And candidly,
I'm just
well, no, but I do get a little bit sensitive to it because it's like, I say as if, it's like as soon as that happens, like, and I finish my call, we're communicating with the truck. Where are we going next? You know what I mean? And so there's so much going on that the last thing I can think about is trying to put on. And, it ain't my choice that like they repurpose that on our YouTube channel. I know sort of some of our fan base is like, all right, enough already. But people seem to really lap it up. So
I love it. I wasn't taking a shot at you, by the way. I hope it didn't come out that way. Okay. I enjoy those. Those are awesome. I mean, because you're right. I mentioned it when my jaw hit the floor in my home and I can't stop staring at the ceiling. I mean, you get that in the instant time and you're doing the same thing and you're focused on 9,000 things. I find it great. It's pure.
Well, the Namajunas Zhang Weili first fight, right? That was a crazy reaction and the cameras, because we're sitting there thinking we're hunkering down for 25 minutes. And obviously, as you know, the rematch went the full 25. So,
right.
Thug Rose has created all these crazy moments in the broadcast booth for us. And then you think you're hunkering down for 25 minutes and then she kicks her head into next week, So, yeah, just crazy reactions from the professional fans.
For sure. Well, Jon, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to hop on. I had a lot of fun. I can't wait for what's next here in 2022. As my buddies make jokes with me now, like, because I always say, as a diehard fan, listen, I understand exactly what's going on. And they go, bro, you started 2 years ago. These people have been watching for 10, 12 years. But I'm the expert now, I tell them. So I can't thank you enough for hopping on with me.
My pleasure, man. Look forward to doing it again. I wish you all the best. We got to get you at a live event, though. Doesn't sound like you've been to a show yet. So
I have never been.
All right. Hit me up. We'll make that happen, brother.
Cool. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.